It's great to be back. I was probably in one of the most remote parts of Custer State Park when you guys met a week ago. No cell, no nothing, but it was beautiful. And while I was out of town in South Dakota on my bicycle visiting Mount Rushmore and visiting these Tatankas behind me in Custer State Park, a lot of stuff happened. And as I searched for a way to make some sense of it all after returning to Boulder, I came across a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that I wanted to share with you. And this quote says as follows: "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, politic, nor popular. One must take it because it is right. As Rotarians, we are people of conscience who make doing the right thing part of our daily lives. That's what service above self means. That's what our four-way test is all about. Today, we need to keep this in the forefront of our minds, and when we get a chance, we need to share it with those around us. I will now turn the Zoom podium over to Michael Weatherwax, who I understand is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the four-way test. Michael.
That is my hope. Please join together with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now the four-way test. And if you ever get into a situation where you want to apply the four-way test to some ethical decision that you need to make, I'll give you an easy way to remember it, because the four-way test is it, will it? So let's do the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Michael. You seem like you might have that memorized. Okay. Today, let's see, we have a blue badge transition for Michael's colleague, Jamie McCoppin. Next on our agenda.
Okay. It is my honor to reintroduce Jamie McCoppin, who joined Boulder Rotary Club in October of last year, as John said, sponsored by Michael Weatherwax. And we're going to have a slide up in a minute. John, would it work for you to come back to Jamie's introduction later in the program or at the end of our meeting?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
We want to give her her due. Thank you.
Want to give her her due, indeed. So I think that just to give you an idea how the meeting's going to flow today, our next, we'll start with Dr. Thomas Cech, and then we have a special announcement. There we go. With Dr. Thomas Cech, we have a special announcement that I'm not going to give away at 1, and then we have George Russell with birthdays at 1:05, and then we'll have our announcement video, our MP4, at 1:10. These times are approximate. Do not hold us to them in this Zoom world. So I would like to now turn this over and have Dr. Cech introduced by me. All right. Some of me is still out in the buffalo field that's behind me. Dr. Thomas Cech is a chemist and a distinguished professor at the University of Colorado in biochemistry. In 1989, he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry along with Sidney Altman of Yale University. Their research focused on ribonucleic acid, RNA, and demonstrated that RNA in living cells is not only a molecule of heredity, but it can also function as a catalyst. Now, even though I majored in English, I was having trouble using the word biocatalyst in a sentence. So I did a little more research and learned that prior to Dr. Cech's discovery, only proteins were thought to be biocatalysts that facilitated chemical reactions at the cellular level. The discovery that RNA also functioned as a biocatalyst came as a complete surprise to scientists and caused the rewriting of several chapters in scientific textbooks. Throughout his career, Dr. Cech has promoted scientific education. He has served as the president of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute prior to coming to dear old CU to do research and teach full-time at the Cech Lab. Today, we at Boulder Rotary are thrilled to welcome one of Boulder's and the world's most distinguished scientists to share some of the highlights in his extraordinary life. Dr. Cech, I yield the Zoom podium to you.
Well, thank you very much, John. Let me see if I can get my presentation up here. All right. Can everyone see that? Can everyone hear me? Well, you can't tell me whether you hear me because you're all on mute. But anyway, I'll assume you can hear me unless someone yells out. Great pleasure to be here, and good afternoon to all of you. It's been a number of decades since I've spoken at a Rotary Club. In fact, the last time I was 12 years old, I was in Iowa City, Iowa, and I had just won the Eastern Iowa Science Fair. And so my mom dropped me off at the Rotary Club, and I walked in and had a nice lunch and gave my presentation on growing crystals and about different crystal forms that occur in nature. And afterwards, the president of the chapter of the Rotary Club said, well, we didn't really understand too much of what you had to say, but thank you anyway for coming. Well, given that this is Boulder, Colorado, and that I have probably improved in my ability to explain things over these decades, I'm going to talk a little bit about Colorado's first Nobel Prize, which was now 30 or maybe 30 and a half years ago, and also then tell you a little bit about some of the other activities that have kept me busy in those last 30 years. So I think I also, there's also a laser pointer here, which may become useful at some point. Okay. So let me, this may seem very old-fashioned to you, but I think many of you, and I have a number of friends there in the Zoom audience, I think you are probably of a level of maturity that you remember videotapes, right? This was about 3 technologies ago, but it turns out to be a very good analogy for information transfer in living cells. So information in our bodies is stored in the form of the DNA in your chromosomes, and that DNA is sort of akin to a gold seal master copy of your favorite video. And from that one master copy, you can make limitless numbers of copies of that tape, which have the same movie on them, right? They're informationally equivalent to the master copy. And that's sort of akin to the RNA in our cells. And then if you have a VCR machine, you can plug in the videotape and you get an image as an output. And this would be the equivalent of the cell's protein, which is encoded by the RNA. Now, our view of the importance of this middleman, this RNA in the middle, based not only on our work, but on many others in the field, has sort of changed to be sort of more like this. And we're very excited about ribonucleic acid because it can be both an information carrier like DNA, but as we found, it can also be a biocatalyst. And thank you, John, for introducing this term. And this was a role that had previously been thought to be the purview solely of protein enzymes. Now, RNA has been much in the news lately with the coronavirus. And as you all have read, the coronavirus doesn't even mess with DNA. It has a genome composed of RNA. Because RNA is a good information carrier, the virus is able to use the RNA to make the proteins that it needs all day long, goes back and forth between RNA and protein with no need for DNA. So that is a good example of how RNA can be an information carrier. Now, how did we come to find this? Well, we were studying the way that genes worked in the nucleus of this single-celled pond animal called Tetrahymena thermophila. And we found that a particular gene made an RNA that was spliced. This means that the RNA was cut and rejoined in a very specific way to give the functional RNA that the cell needed. And this is a process that goes on in many, many times. It's an essential process in human cells, but it turned out that looking at it in this simple pond animal gave us an experimental advantage and allowed us to move ahead at a very good speed on understanding how this RNA splicing worked. Now, this is a very technical slide, and I'm not going to go through all of the gymnastics that this RNA, shown as the straight line and the wiggly line, that it was able to perform. But we were able to figure out when I was an assistant professor here at the University of Colorado Boulder, how the RNA rearranged its own structure. But what we had trouble figuring out was what was catalyzing this complex rearrangement of the RNA. And in this early slide, you can see that we have a hypothesis here, a little dashed rectangle. Doesn't seem like we're too sure of this because it's a rather faint dashed rectangle, that maybe there's a protein stuck to the RNA, because after all, you could read in any biology textbook that all reactions that are catalyzed in living cells are catalyzed by proteins. So there must be some kind of a protein. But as our research went on and we tried to remove this hypothetical protein by adding detergent or boiling the RNA splicing activity persisted. And so the hypothesis that there was a protein involved just wasn't holding up. And this led to a departmental Christmas party here in Boulder in 1981, when Paula, my graduate student, presented me with this daisy. Is it a protein or is it not? And fortunately, we could come up with a more scientific way of solving this problem than picking the petals off the daisy. And we found that indeed there was no protein, and the RNA by itself was capable of catalyzing this complex cutting and rejoining of its own chemical bonds. Now, this is now sort of has gotten the, I think the ultimate accolade for any scientific discovery is if it ends up in textbooks. And indeed, these discoveries made at the university here ended up in biology, biochemistry, and chemistry textbooks, both at the undergraduate level and the graduate level, but even at the high school level. This particular diagram is from one of my postdoctoral fellows, Barb Golden, who's now a professor at Purdue University. And why did this have so much general interest beyond perhaps RNA biochemists? Well, it has to do with theories about how life might have gotten started on the early planet Earth. So this is a story, well, perhaps not about Campbell's primordial soup, but about the early events that took place for the first self-reproducing molecules, which were the precursors of today's life. And when scientists and philosophers thought about how life might have started, they came up with sort of a chicken and the egg problem of early evolution. You absolutely need some kind of an informational molecule to go from one generation to the next generation. You have to reproduce some kind of information to get to the next generation. But if DNA is the informational molecule, it was known that DNA couldn't copy itself and reproduce itself without protein enzymes to make the daughter copies of the DNA. So what came first, the informational molecule or the catalytic molecule, the DNA or the protein? Well, now that we know that RNA can do both of these things, remember the big green RNA in the middle of my earlier slide, RNA is both an informational molecule and it's a biocatalyst. So maybe at the beginning, there was RNA replicating itself. And then the proteins came along later, and more recently, as the need for storing more genetic information in a very safe and reproducible way, then DNA was invented. So that's the short story that led to the Nobel Prize. Here I am in 1989, and it was my great pleasure to not only bring the family along, but also my longtime research associate, Art Zog, who is still with me, the graduate student, Paula Grabowski, who did so much of the work, now a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and their spouses as well. And at this point, our daughters were pretty young. This is my daughter, Allison. She was allowed to come to the ceremony, but my other daughter, Jennifer, was so young that she wasn't even allowed to attend. And here are my daughter and two of Art Zog's daughters watching the festivities in Stockholm in 1989. And then about 20 years later, I was able to bring my daughter Jennifer back to a sort of a homecoming of all the Nobel laureates that took place in 2001. And here are our friends, Tom and Joan Stites from Yale University in this photograph. So I'm going to skip ahead because about a decade after winning the Nobel Prize, I inherited the Howard Hughes fortune. Wow, that's pretty cool. How could that happen? Well, it turns out that Howard Hughes had started a medical institute, and during one of his fabulous plane crashes when he was serving as the test pilot of a very high-speed aircraft and was recovering from that crash that occurred in Southern California, he was talking to his physician and decided that medical research might be an exciting place to invest some of his fortune. Of course, if you know anything about Howard Hughes, he was also very much interested in avoiding taxes and was going to, of course, use this medical institute as a way of sort of minimizing his tax burden. But what happened after Hughes died is that many of people tried to invalidate the medical institute, but the court upheld it, and they ended up with about $5 billion to spend on medical research. And I was one of the so-called Howard Hughes investigators whose research was being supported. There were about 300 of us, or there now are about 300 of us across the country. So in the year 2000, I got a phone call from Hannah Gray, who was the chairman of the board of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, also the former, I think the first woman who was the president of a major research university. She was the president of the University of Chicago for many years. And she asked me if I might want to be the president of the Institute. And I had been looking for some way to sort of make an impact nationally and internationally on science and education. And so I knew immediately that this was something that I wanted to do. I flew to Washington to interview for the job. I had some ideas that they thought were worth investing in. And so my family and I moved to the Washington, D.C. area in the year 2000. And for the next decade, I spent $3 million a day without ever having to raise a nickel, because the Hughes endowment was so large that we had an annual budget approaching $1 billion a year, being run by the $18 billion endowment. So one of the ideas that I had and that I had proposed to the trustees was that maybe Howard Hughes, in addition to supporting scientists at great research universities like CU Boulder in the United States, should perhaps also have its own research campus. So we looked for a piece of land that was large enough to be able to be a campus for the next 100 years. So we wanted something much bigger than a university campus, hundreds of acres. We wanted it to be close to our headquarters in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and we wanted it to be close to an international airport so that this could become a hub for science research and education that would serve the world. And so we found a farm that was called Genelia Farm. The farmer had named this after his two daughters, Jane and Cornelia. And so it was sort of a genetic hybrid. He named it Genelia Farm. And we decided to keep that name, to buy the land, and to build a campus for interdisciplinary scientific research. Now, one of the first things we had to do was to hire, we had a competition for international architects. We interviewed many of them. I remember Caesar Pelli, who had designed the National Airport in Washington, D.C., wonderful guy. We ended up choosing Raphael Vignoli, who was an Argentinian but was working out of New York City. And he designed for us a landscape building that had glass walls, glass offices, was completely invisible from the road, from Leesburg Pike, and had grass and flowers growing on all of the roofs. And this building would be set into the landscape. It was a very exciting design. And so we went ahead and started building this. It was a big project. At one point, we had 200 architects working on site simultaneously, doing all the drafting, and thousands of workmen involved in the construction. Here's a picture from the air of that landscape building while it was under construction. Here's a conference housing being built next to a lake. Here's housing for some of the scientists, the group leaders, and the postdoctoral fellows and students who were going to be working at the laboratory. And at the same time, we were building it. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. So there was a lot of glass in the building in order to be able to give it this open, transparent feel. Sometimes we thought maybe a little too much glass. And here are just a few views of the laboratory building from the ground floor. Here it is at night. Here's the auditorium and some of the other features. Here's the pub. And because good food and a beer at night is very essential for good scientific conversations. We also needed a scientific goal that was worthy of such a large investment. And we decided that understanding how healthy brains work and how connections between neurons give rise to complex behaviors was the sort of goal that if you brought together physicists and computer scientists and biologists, neuroscientists, you might be able to achieve. And in fact, long after I left and got this started, other people did the heavy lifting, the research that really made Genelia Farm internationally famous for its discoveries in how neuronal connections are responsible for complex behavior. It also became an international center for meetings and workshops, and here is one of hundreds of brochures. You can see an artist representation of this landscape building. This was an international meeting of research scholars funded by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Well, after doing that for a decade, I had a staff of 300 people, most of whom were accountants and finance people and investors and lawyers. And, that was okay, but I sort of missed my colleagues and working directly with students. So I decided to leave this cloistered environment in the Washington, D.C. area and return to Boulder, where on the right-hand side, you can see the view out of my office window right after one of our famous spring snowstorms. And what particularly drew me back to CU Boulder was the opportunity to start or to lead what is now called the BioFrontiers Institute. It's located in the Crothers Biotechnology Building on the East Campus of CU Boulder. And this building holds not only our institute, but also the Department of Biochemistry and an engineering department, the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering, the first time in the history of CU Boulder that arts and science departments have cohabitated with an engineering department, and it leads to some really exciting new collaborative opportunities. So this was sort of an experiment that was sort of like, can you build Genelia Farm type excitement, but without the advantage of having any money, right? We're a state university. We get 3% of our budget from the state of Colorado. I hear it's going down to 1.5% this coming year because of the pandemic. And so we didn't have the advantage of having $1 billion of spare cash to spend on the project. But we have some advantages that we didn't have at Howard Hughes. For example, the ability to engage students and other trainees in the projects. And so we hired some really fabulous faculty who I really enjoy working with. And this sort of quilt on the right-hand side shows how they really have combined the disciplines in really interesting ways. That many of them, each color represents a different area of science, and you can see that many of the people we have hired have been trained originally in one field, have moved on in graduate studies to another field, and now have chosen a home department at CU Boulder, which is often different from those in which they started out their training. So it's this sort of mixing of the scientific disciplines that we find very exciting. And we also have been have sort of an unusual mix because I'm the only sort of guy in the leadership team. We have a number of fabulous women, Leslie Linois, Natalie On, Christy Anseth from engineering, who really are the rest of the leadership group. The last thing I'm going to say, and this is my last slide, is that the other thing that really excites me about being at CU Boulder is the opportunity to work with really young students, to teach undergraduates in the class, and also to especially bring them into the research lab and let them explore with state-of-the-art equipment and techniques, and the ability to sort of ask questions where the answer is not known. It's unlike a classroom where there's a correct answer for the final exam. We ask questions where we don't know what the answer is because they're right out on the fringe of what is possible. And so of these students, I'm just going to point out 4 of them who are the undergraduates. So Grace just graduated with honors and is enrolling in the PhD program at UT Austin. Richard was from Denver, first in his family to go to college, and he's in the MD PhD program that is joint between UCLA and Caltech. Natasha from South Dakota, she is now in the PhD program at the University of Washington in Seattle. And Obi, back here, is an MD student at the University of Pennsylvania currently. And so it's working with these students which really particularly excites me about being back in Boulder. And with that, I would like to open it up for any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Cech. We're gonna go to the first question, which is Sally Brown. Would you mind unmuting yourself? Sally Brown.
Hello, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it. And I wanna know, did the Nobel Prize change your course of research? Getting the prize, did it change your research?
Well, did it change my research? It didn't too much because I was already sort of well-funded. I had the Howard Hughes position before the Nobel Prize. I really didn't have to fight for funding for my own research. I was already getting excellent trainees from coming into my lab to do the work. And it certainly didn't hurt to get the prize. It did make quite a bit of difference nationally and internationally because I think shining the spotlight on RNA really helped lead to sort of a revolution in biology. And there are now annual meetings where there are 1,000 laboratories from around the world come together just to talk about RNA. Now it wasn't only us who were doing this, but we were one of just a handful of laboratories initially that sort of made the importance of RNA in biology become so obvious and led other people to sort of move their work into that area. Thank you for your question, Sally.
Thank you.
Okay, Chad, you've got the next question. Chad.
You gave us a really great look backwards, but I'm curious about looking forwards and what some of the breakthroughs we might look for over the next decade and what would be the implications of those breakthroughs.
Right, well, we've moved, I tend to get sort of bored with what I'm doing about every 10 years. I think 10 years is a good amount of time. So I spent 10 years at Howard Hughes, moved back here and spent 10 years working on telomerase, which extends the ends of our chromosomes. And now we're moving into two new areas. So here's what's coming up in the future. First of all, it turns out that much of the regulation of how genes work in our cells, right, which is really important. It's important that, that the genes that are being used in a liver cell are very different from the genes that are being used in a brain cell or a skin cell, even though all those cells have the same set of about 20,000 genes. Which ones are being expressed has to be tuned to the particular need. And it turns out that RNA is a key regulator of what happens to the DNA, which is sort of a surprise to a lot of people. They think, you know, DNA makes RNA, makes protein, it's sort of a one-way street. But once the RNA is made, it loops back and controls the expression of the DNA. So that's a brave new world of research, and that's the one that the people in the lab are working on now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Lena, you've got the next question.
This is a question from a non-scientific English major. You said early on that RNA could replicate itself and function as almost as a master tape. So I'm wondering if RNA can function as a master tape and replicate itself, then why do you need DNA? And how did that get started? Is that really a dumb question?
No, that's a brilliant question. And we actually have some idea of why that is true. So the coronavirus has just about 20,000 individual units along its RNA genome. When you have that small of a number of genes, you have a dozen genes or so, then RNA is plenty good enough to do the information storage job, as well as serving as the messenger for protein synthesis. It turns out that RNA is not nearly as stable as DNA, right? DNA is so stable that they find mammoths and mastodons that have been frozen in the ice for 10,000 years, and they can still extract DNA from them and it still read the sequence of it. RNA isn't nearly that stable. So as you get to a bigger genome, like the human genome with its 20,000 genes, then you need to have a more stable storehouse of genetic information. And that's what DNA provides.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Patty Limerick, you've got a question.
Hi, Patty.
Hey, hi, Tom. So I just wanted to check a piece of folk. You came back, that Bruce Benson becoming president played quite a big part in your coming back here. And if that's the case, I think we want to know that so that we can all write to thank him.
Thank you, Patty. Well, what happened was that just as I was making my final decision was the day that Bruce had been elected as the next president of the university. And so I went to see him in his Denver office because I was going to sort of stake my next phase of my career on coming back to Boulder. And I had heard that he was quite a, how should we put it, quite a polarized politician in a direction that I wasn't sure aligned with some of my own views. So we spent an hour together. It was the same day he got the presidency, and I was totally convinced by what he said, that he did not think that this was a political appointment. He thought this was an opportunity to bring both parties together to do what was right for the university. You know, just as many things in our society, like what is going on with George Floyd protests right now, these should not be partisan. People should do the right thing, right? Because it's the right thing. And so there's a number of these issues that should be above politics. And I was convinced that Bruce was the guy who was going to lead the university in a bipartisan, or maybe it should be nonpartisan manner. And I think he did a darn good job.
Thank you.
Okay, Merrill Glustrom, you have a question.
Yes, Dr. Cech, thanks so much for coming to speak to our club. We really appreciate it. And I don't want to put you in a box here, because the guy who did this sequencing the DNA with COVID-19 hasn't been able to find why there's an association between blood type and susceptibility, human susceptibility to COVID-19. So it says it's something that's haunting him now. So, but I wonder if you could speculate how what's going on there.
I know quite a bit about the coronavirus and the antivirals and the vaccines. I had not even heard that there was is it that some people with certain blood types are more easily infected or have a worse outcome? I hadn't heard this.
It's a worse outcome, and it seems to be much more complex than that, but they've been able to tease out type A blood from what the New York Times article I read says. But there's 4 or 5 other associations that they can't tease out and are getting frustrated by as they try to solve this problem. But there seems to be a 50% increase in susceptibility to a dangerous outcome with a type A blood type.
Well, see, I've learned something during this hour already. And what I always say to my class when they ask me a question that I can't answer, I say, you know, that's a great question. I'll have the answer for you next class period. So, Merrill, I think that's what we're going to have to do here.
Okay. Leslie says hi.
Great. Okay, we've got a question from Charlotte. Charlotte.
Yes, hello, and thank you again for a great presentation. We really appreciate you coming today. I have 2 questions, slightly different. Hopefully they're short. So BioFrontiers Institute works a lot with computational biology and bioimaging, and was just curious about some exciting upcoming frontiers in that area, specifically using RNA, cleaving nucleic acid enzymes to develop biosensors and their roles in future modeling of biological systems. That's question 1.
Whoa!
And then if you have a message for the next generation about working in multidisciplinary environments.
Well, so I've been convinced for a long time that the way that you make the most progress in any scientific field, but also maybe in many other endeavors of humankind, is that, you know, the people who've been in that field for a long time tend to be sort of complacent, and they're used to thinking about things in a certain way, and they have a set of tools which work pretty well. And now you bring somebody in from the outside, from an adjacent field, and they have a new way of thinking about things, they have a new set of tools, and all of a sudden you're re-examining a lot of the things that you understood to some extent, and all of a sudden you can jump up to a whole new level of understanding. And that's what we feel we can do by bringing the computer scientists and the physicists and the engineers together in the same building and in the same, they're not all in our building, by the way, but it works particularly well if you run into them in the hall. Hopefully we'll be able to do that again, starting pretty soon. And so this interdisciplinary science, I think, is the future, and particularly computation, which, you know, 20 years ago, computation in biology mostly meant using word processing to write your manuscripts. That's the kind of computer work we did. Now with the genome projects, the students are spending half of their time in front of the computer looking at data sets that were produced perhaps in a different country, and they're reanalyzing them to find the answers to their questions from someone else's genomic data. So this has been a big change, and it's going to transform. It's already starting to transform medicine, but it certainly is the future of medicine as well. So thank you for your question.
Okay, Jack, do you have a question?
Jeannie, hi.
Jeannie,
Tom,
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you,
Good to
Tom?
see you.
Good to
Hi,
see you.
Jack.
Hi, Tom.
I got a question for you regarding, maybe you could tell the group a bit about the young scientist who came to your lab named Jennifer Doudna.
Yeah. So by the way, we have currently about 38 professors around the world who have trained in my lab. And a number of these are the superstars at places like Stanford and Yale, and in the case of Jennifer Doudna, UC Berkeley. Jennifer came from Harvard University, where she was, actually she was born in Hawaii, in Hilo, on the wet side of the Big Island. She was educated in Pomona College in Southern California. As soon as she hit Harvard, it was clear that she was the brightest star that Harvard had seen in a long time. I was lucky enough to have her come to work with us for about 5 years, after which she was given a faculty position first at Yale University, but they gave her tenure in record time. She was the hottest young professor they had seen for a long time. And then she moved to Berkeley, where she discovered this CRISPR genome editing, how to change the human genome in a precise way using a bacterial defense system called CRISPR, which I think many of you have heard about. So she is very successful and could be possibly a Nobel Prize recipient in the future.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you. Gordon Gamm, you have something you'd like to say?
Hi, Tom.
And by the way, Gordon invited me to the Rotary Club initially, so thank you, Gordon, for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming, Tom. Yeah, I was just wondering if RNA is the source of the beginning of life. Where did RNA come from?
Well, so this is an area that has excited some chemists to see whether RNA could form spontaneously from the kind of simple molecules that would have been present on the primitive Earth, like nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and phosphate from rocks, and some source of energy, like either comet collisions or lightning. And they've actually been able to get the building blocks of RNA synthesized in rather substantial concentrations under these plausibly prebiotic conditions. Now, of course, the question of how did life start isn't just a scientific question, it's sort of a historical question, right? So just because you can make it work in the lab, it doesn't really mean that's how it happened. But it at least means that it's plausible that it could have happened that way. And so that's the stage we're at. We think that we can see the chemical pathway by which the RNA, short scraps of RNA, could be self-assembled by just chemical reactions from simple molecules present on the primitive Earth. And then, whether that really happened that way, it's hard to know how we would ever be sure.
Is there any relationship between the boson, which was called the God particle, and what you're speaking about in terms of the origin of the RNA?
Yeah, there might be. at some level, but sort of subatomic particles in physics are sort of, they're in everything, right? And so, sure, they would be components of these primitive chemical reactions, but it's not clear that the bosons would be any different in an organic compound than they would be in an inorganic compound. So I don't have any particular insight. Interesting question, but I don't have any particular insight on that.
Okay, Gordon, you want to take the response?
Sure, Tom.
Yeah, and the thank you by the response.
Yeah. Tom, yes, I've been asked to be the responder. That means that I'm the one that gets the hook to take people off the stage. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was an exciting presentation. You seem to live a wonderful life and have a beautiful facility to be at home during this pandemic and watching what's going on. The idea of responding to a Nobel Prize winner is intimidating. That the only award that I can recall was when I was a teenager at summer school, and I got a blue ribbon for table manners, and that was something none of the kids wanted. So that was given to the most unpopular kid in the class. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that in your name, the Boulder Rotary Club is pleased to contribute 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus Club Fund. After 26 years of hard work, Rotary and its partners are on the brink of eradicating this tenacious disease. But a strong push is needed now to root it out once and for all. It is conceivable for polio to be eradicated in the next few years. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you all so much as well. Take care.
We'll have a certificate delivered to you at some future time.
Okay, President John Sullivan, it's your meeting.
President John, that's me. How are we set for Jamie McCoppin?
So sorry, everybody, especially Jamie. No worries, we'll be back next week. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, now we have a special presentation that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show today. And I believe, I'm not sure if it's Norma or Gary who's leading off this presentation.
Well, actually, I just would like to introduce Bill Farrow, who many of you know, who's going to be taking the lead here in this presentation. So, Bill?
Okay, hi everyone. Rotary for Mental Health started in 2012 with 3 clubs. Currently, there are 19 member clubs, primarily in the Denver metro area. It's been extremely gratifying to me to see the wide range of mental health projects clubs have completed. Without a doubt, much of our success stems from our longtime collaboration with the Hayes Family Foundation. In 2018, we launched 2 annual mental health awards to recognize club achievements and support club projects. The Rotary for Mental Health Award is sponsored by my club, Boulder Valley, and your club won that award last year for the Mental Wellness Speaker Series at the JCC. The other award is the Hayes Family Mental Health Award, and that's a district award. And I bet you can probably guess who won it this year. But be that as it may, I'd like to introduce Lindsay Hayes Daly, who will now tell us more about the award and about her family foundation. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Bill. Thank you, everybody. It's really fun to be here today and to learn about a Nobel Prize winner and everything happening in Boulder. Our family foundation, the Hayes Family Foundation, was established in 2010 when my grandfather, Rotarian Mike Hayes, was still alive. After he passed away 4 years later, with our board's help, I was given the really special opportunity to expand our seasonal giving to create our mission and specific focus areas. I first heard of Rotarians for Mental Health at a Rotary meeting, I'm in the Denver Cherry Creek Club, when the group was new. And what would eventually help shape our definition of giving, we gave Rotarians for Mental Health an unrestricted grant. Our focus has continued to be smaller nonprofits and grants for new programs. And the idea that you can't get a grant until you have a grant, so we often are the ones who give the first grant. Bill and the Rotarians for Mental Health took this to the next level for us, helping establish the Hayes Mental Health Award 3 years ago, and we thank you. Because we are small, our grant amount is limited, but our grantees become part of our story, and part of our story is my sister. Allison never finished her degree at CU Boulder, and she passed away from complications of alcohol at age 30. Our family had resources, both community and financial, but there was so much we didn't know about depression, anxiety, and using alcohol to cope. We have become educated because Allison's story is forever part of our story, but also because of nonprofits like Natural Highs, which did not exist when Allison was a teenager in high school or an undergraduate at CU. We now know the power of positive peer support, trained addiction counselors, and a community of all ages and experiences talking and sharing their stories. So we are grateful to the Boulder Rotary Club, you all, especially the Behavioral Wellness Committee, Hans, Gary, and Norma, for applying for this award and sharing with us Natural High's mission and advocacy. We thank Avani for sharing her story and Natural High's story and the work that all at Natural Highs do for youth, especially the new 12-week summer online program to continue the needed connection and support to teens during this anxious time. I have included a screenshot of our website because we would love for you to visit and learn about other stories impacting us through the missions of local nonprofits and Rotary clubs like yours. Under mental health, our top story will be highlighting this award once I have a Zoom picture, which I'm going to take right now before I forget, that captures this unique moment in history. So please visit our website, learn more about us, stay in touch, contact me, stay in touch with Rotarians for Mental Health. Thank you for your time today, and it was a huge honor to be here.
Norma?
Yes, hi. So on behalf of the Behavioral Wellness Committee, I am just delighted to accept this award from the Hayes Family Foundation. It means so much to our club because it enables us to support the wonderful work done by Natural Highs. So I'm very happy to present Avani Dilger. She's the Executive Director of Natural Highs. Avani has devoted her life to helping people experiencing mental health and substance use disorders, and she's highly respected by everyone in the community. So here's Avani.
So thank you, Norma, so much, and Gary and Hans and Lindsay for sharing this award with us. You know, this sends a very, very strong message to young people in the community because, as you probably know, even in a community like Boulder, it's often that young people do not have the representation, do not have the platform to share their voices and to have their leadership supported. So, Lindsay, I'm so moved by your story and by your foundation's message and idea to really give young people wings so that they can start and that they can bring much needed awareness into the community. And I don't know if you've heard, the city of Boulder just let the person go who's coordinating youth programs for the city. They were deemed non-essential, and so we don't even have a representation right now in the city to advocate for grants for young people. So during this time, it is very brave and very beautiful of you to elevate the leadership of young people. And I want to invite everybody. So in Natural Highs, it's all about community. We want to share all of our resources with you. So yes, we do a lot of work for young people, but we also do a lot of work for adults. So you all are welcome. Or if you have loved ones that you feel need some inspiration right now, or need some support around resilience right now, they're all welcome to join. So the easiest way to connect is you go to our website, naturalhighs.org, you sign up with your email, and you get little care packets sent by email that inspire resiliency during COVID-19. And then we offer tons of Zoom in-person meetings during this challenging time. Some of them are just for teens, and some of them are for people all ages. So look for special invitations to all of you. We are going to hold intergenerational philosophy circles where young people and people all ages can have meaningful conversations during what matters during these times. And I can tell you, anytime we did intergenerational philosophy circles, people from different generations were just so inspired to hear from young people, from old people. So just know that this is coming your way, and we're just so moved and so grateful. And some of our team is here today, so I just want to do a shout out to Tess and Kara and Dee, who are all young leaders and are just doing so much work that just got recognized and uplifted by you all. So deep gratitude to you all.
So the Hayes Family Foundation funding is perfectly timed because it kicks off the summer programming for Natural Highs. And by the way, you are looking at the members of the Behavioral Wellness Committee, and we are all supposed to raise our hands so you can see, if you're looking at the gallery view, who we all are. So we have a wonderful, very active committee. So anyways, the Hayes Family Foundation is perfectly timed because it's going to kick off what Natural Highs needs to do this summer. The club might also be interested to know that the Behavioral Wellness Committee currently has recommendations in front of the Boulder Rotary Club Foundation for consideration for next fiscal year's budget. And noteworthy is the fact that 2 Rotarians have committed to matching Rotary funds, which would more than double the amount that we would be able to devote to Natural Highs. So we'll see what happens with that.
All right. Thank you very much, and congratulations. I understand from Dr. George Russell that we have some people with birthdays who would like to sing, recite poems. George, fill us in.
Actually, we have Michael Simpson sent in a poem. I think I would like him to unmute and recite his poem about COVID.
Okay, Michael.
Okay, well, I'm on here. I just have to pull the darn thing up. I've been trying to get through to George by phone, but wasn't working. So anyhow, here we go. You guys hear me?
Yes. Yeah, but we can't see it very well. Okay, there you go.
Okay, well, there we go. Is that better? I'm just sitting here in my cave. You can see, you know, stars are out there, but I'm in the cave. Stuck at home in my virus dome, I browse the internet, but virus this and virus that is all the news I get. I turned to do the census, but it didn't take too long. They asked a lot of questions, but not one that I got wrong. I thought about my taxes, though the deadline's been put off. Then the dead root of that deadline made me fret about my cough. Stay at home's the order. When outside, stay far apart. A little walk's permitted, but disinfect before you start. The prez says it's soon over. The docs are not so sure. I'm really not quite certain how much more I can endure. 3 weeks incarceration was the Boulder City plan, confined to one's home quarters with no contact with the Klan. I'm thankful for my iPhone, the internet and such. So virus dome or no, I'll try to stay in touch. A brighter day will surely dawn, the date we know not when. And I will love that special day when we'll share a hug again. Back to you, George.
That's very good, very good. I'd like to introduce Michael Weatherwax, who's a former president of the club and the contributor of Friday is the best place at Rotary is the best place to be. Michael, you unmute and say what you'd like to say for your birthday.
Thank you, George. I celebrated my 75th birthday on Wednesday, 3/4 of a century. And I am almost to the point where I have spent half of my life as a member of Rotary. And that's one of the things that I really miss right now in terms of the human contact, the fellowship that we got from the meetings, and all the friends that I have in Rotary. It's been really one of the worst parts of this stay at home and don't get together in groups that we've been dealing with. So that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. And the other thing I wanted to do is to remind you of the Paul Harris Fellowship match that's going on right now, where and it will run until June the 15th, a week from Monday. And what we are doing is matching your contribution to the Rotary Foundation that will get you to the first or next Paul Harris Fellowship. Now, each Paul Harris Fellowship level requires a $1,000 contribution. And so if you are willing to contribute $500, I am willing to contribute $500 on your behalf to make you a Paul Harris Fellow. And if you need to, in the RIB is a discussion about that and a form to fill out and a opportunity to make a donation. They're running a little slow right now, and I think that's principally because we're not meeting in person and having to rely on the virtual match. But the virtual match will be actual if you are willing to make a donation. So I would encourage you to help me contribute more and help John get his President John get his goal for our annual fund donations met this year. So please give some consideration to becoming a Paul Harris Fellow or to move up to the next level of Paul Harris Fellowship. Thank you, and I appreciate your, and those of you who have already given, I appreciate that very much, and I hope that many of you will also want to contribute. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Michael. And be sure and call me if you want to make a comment during your birthday. My cell number is 303-638-8622.
Look at all those June bugs. All right. Well, once we finish up here with birthdays, I don't want to shortchange anyone. Okay, look at that. We will now advance to an MP4 video courtesy of Daryl and Sally Brown.
And today, Diana Sherry.
It's the best place to be on a Friday afternoon in Boulder or wherever you are at this moment. June is Rotary Fellowships Month.
Now, perhaps more than ever, brings to light the importance of the fellowship that we have in Rotary.
Love these meetings, love these speakers. Now is your opportunity to help. If you have an idea for a speaker, you can reach out to Carl Kurtz or Cassidy Murphy. I keep calling Winston Churchill, but so far he hasn't returned my call.
Seance.
You may have noticed a little pest flying around in swarms. Local experts say the western slope has been invaded. KRX5 reporter Star Harvey has more.
The moths, look at how big they're getting. Sally!
Our next food drive to assist Sister Carmen is on June 13th from noon to 2 p.m. You can come by and bring food, or you can sign up to volunteer. John has the sign-up sheet.
Unfortunately, Sally and I are going to be out of town, and John Sullivan's going to need help with the heavy stuff. So make sure and sign up, and let's beat hunger. These were the ribs I cooked on Memorial Day, and dang, I sure opened them up. But you know what? You got to open up your rib to keep informed. Between the rib and the brew, that's how we're reaching out to membership, to keep you informed. So make sure and open up the rib. And you're watching the brew.
Boulder Rotary Club and Mental Health Partners are pairing up to offer another free suicide prevention training on June 12th, immediately following the meeting. There will be a link in the rib, and pre-registration is required.
Did you know that all grant activity for district and global grants goes through our World Community Service Committee? Well, Alessandro Sachs is chair of our committee. He is encouraging you to attend training on June 18th from 1 to 4 p.m. if you'd like to participate in grant projects.
10 days and counting for the annual Ted Manning Memorial Paul Harris Fellowship Match. This is your opportunity to become a Paul Harris Fellow or your next Paul Harris Fellow. Contact Michael Weatherwax.
Every Rotarian, every year. I don't know what that pink stuff is, but Scooby looks hungry. Anytime I think about Frosca and Black Cat, it makes me hungry. And next week's program is going to be Bobby Stuckey and Alicia York from Frasca and Eric Skokan of Black Cat talking about the future of independent restaurants. That's June 12th, 2020, Boulder Rotary Club. Don't miss it.
The question of whether we are making any real progress in the struggle to make racial justice a reality in the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Daryl and Sally. That was tremendous, and I can't top that. So I'm going to officially adjourn this meeting and wish you all a great weekend. Get out there, mow your yard, trim your trees, make some ribs. Thanks. Meeting adjourned.